Joining us now, the Liberal campaign spokesman, Simon Birmingham. Thanks so much for your time. Barnaby Joyce and this row with the Nats, it's actually really quite terrible timing, isn't it, on the eve of the election?
Well, Kieran, the official instructions that are being given to everybody across New South Wales are to hand out how-to-vote cards that preference a number one vote above the line to the joint coalition ticket. Now, sometimes you have individual candidates who argue for a below-the-line vote. It's not unprecedented. Look at the Labor Senator Lisa Singh from Tasmania at the last election. These things happen.
But Barnaby Joyce says it messes up the coalition agreement. That's his point. He's not happy about it.
Look, I don't think that's terribly likely. I think in the end what we're going to see is that across New South Wales, overwhelmingly, Liberal Party, National Party volunteers handing out how-to-vote cards with the number one above the line to preference the Liberal and National Party candidates.
Right, so you think Jim Molan's campaign, even though it has upset the Nationals, isn't going to work anyway?
Well, I think overwhelmingly we will see people doing as we have instructed and requested of all of our volunteers, and that is to hand out how-to-vote cards with the number one above the line. It's, as I say, it's not unprecedented. In both major parties, you get candidates sometimes on the ticket asking for a below-the-line vote. Very rarely is it successful. Sometimes it, ultimately, we will keep asking and expect right across the board people will stick to that plan.
But in Warringah as well, it's frustrated the efforts to get Tony Abbott re-elected as well. So this rogue campaign has caused more problems than probably what it's worth, given you're talking about 150,000 votes needed below the line in New South Wales to secure a quota.
New South Wales is a very big state, and I think there are only these instances of these how-to-vote cards at a handful of polling booths.
Senator, what do you make of Alex Turnbull putting his voice to a get-up robocall in the seat of Flinders?
Look, that's a matter for him, entirely a matter for him. What I would say to the voters of Flinders or the voters anywhere else around Australia is look at the consequences of this election. Consider exactly what the full choice is. Look at the fact that Chris Bowen, the Shadow Treasurer, is there today saying people shouldn't care if the value of their houses goes down. Well, frankly, people should care, and what that shows is that the Labor Party is blind to the consequences of their policies, blind to the consequences of their housing tax driving down the values of people's homes, blind to the consequence of their retiree tax forcing more older Australians onto the pension and increasing, of course, then the tax burden for all Australians. Blind to the fact that $387 billion of taxes across the entire economy will make our economy weaker and jobs growth weaker into the future. These are the consequences of Labor's policies, and Chris Bowen just appears to be completely blind to them.
But Alex Turnbull, at this time, with a robocall in Flinders, reminds the very voters you want to forget about the events of last August, reminds them as they basically go into the ballot box with the son of the deposed leader intervening on behalf of a Liberal that's defected from the party. It's diabolical for Greg Hunt, isn't it?
I think the voters of Flinders will make their decisions based on a range of issues and the big issues that are at stake. One robocall is not likely to make the difference relative to $387 billion of higher taxes that Labor's proposing. In the end, this is an election where people shouldn't be distracted by matters of how-to-vote cards or a single robocall or any of the little things. They should be focused on the big decision ahead, because there's never been a starker choice in terms of the policy contrast between the two parties. It's a big contrast, and you've got Bill Shorten today doing his best to emulate the big taxing, big spending, wasteful, reckless spending history of Gough Whitlam by fronting up there, giving a speech where he'll no doubt dodge questions but just cheer at the Labor faithful, versus Scott Morrison, who is doing what responsible leaders do, turning up to the National Press Club, taking questions, but also making sure that our policy position is prudent, responsible and one the nation can afford.
Is it prudent to release the cost of your policies just 48 hours from election day?
We only have minor updates to make, Laura, because we detailed overwhelmingly all of our costs, all of our plans in a budget 2 months ago, a budget that was handed down demonstrating credibly that we're coming back into surplus, the first surplus since the Howard years, a demonstration that we have fully costed plans to lower the tax burden for Australians, to eliminate bracket creep for hard-working low and middle income earners, That's the difference. Bill Shorten's going to keep that tax burden on people, where the harder they work, the more they're taxed under Bill Shorten. The harder they work under Scott Morrison, the more they'll get to keep, the more they get to invest for their family.
As credible, we're talking about extra spending. One is the East-West Link, the other is the housing announcement that was made on Sunday. So in these costings today, where is the money going to come from? Will there be further cuts? And will the costs for the East-West Link be reflected in smaller surpluses in the outer years?
Well, Laura, obviously the details of those things will be released later today, but let's deal with them quickly. That in terms of the East-West Link, much of the cost of that has been sitting in the contingency of the budget for a long period of time, because we've maintained a consistent position of supporting that. We updated that commitment and tried to present new ways to ensure that the road can actually be built, notwithstanding the fact that the Victorian Labor government has refused to do so to date. That's about being innovative and practical in terms of getting the project built to make a difference to people and their lives in the eastern suburbs of Melbourne, rather than sitting back there. But the money has largely been sitting in the contingency for some time.
Speaking of the eastern suburbs of Melbourne, the Deakin poll of the YouGov Galaxy survey in the Herald Sun says that there's a 6% swing against the coalition in Deakin, in the eastern suburbs of Melbourne. One of the top issues is climate change. In fact, 34% of those surveyed say climate change is their main issue that they're voting on. If you face the sort of result that the Liberals faced in November last year, how big is climate change a factor in that?
Well, again, as we're urging people to contemplate their vote coming Saturday, our message is to say we're taking real action on climate change. Many people back in 2013 said that if you got rid of Labor's carbon tax, you wouldn't meet the 2020 carbon emissions reduction targets. Yet we got rid of the carbon tax and we're on track to exceed those targets by reducing emissions by a further 300 million plus tonnes. We've outlined a $3.5 billion fully costed, fully funded climate solutions program to meet our 2030 targets. Mr Shorten has gone through this entire election campaign refusing to detail the costs of what his plan would be, what the impacts would be.
The nation's emissions have been rising under your government's policy.
Kieran, the emissions may fluctuate from month to month at times, but the point is we're actually on track to meet and exceed the 2020 targets, and we've outlined a plan for the 2030 targets, not just fully costed in terms of the financial cost, but we've also detailed each step of the plan in terms of how those emissions reduction targets would be met. How much would be met from energy efficiency? How much would be met by better land use practices? Those types of steps detailed in our plans. Bill Shorten's done no such thing either in terms of detailing by what extent he would rely upon the different components of emissions reductions activities to meet his much larger 2030 targets, nor has he outlined what the economic or financial or fiscal costs of doing so would be.
The East-West Link, as mentioned before, is one of these key issues in the seat of Deakin in Melbourne. This has not been all that popular in Melbourne when you have Daniel Andrews, who is a seemingly popular premier, basically thumbing his nose at $1.3 billion worth of free money. So why are you moving ahead with this, and why and how much is it going to cost the budget? Are you where's money going to be cut in order to pay for this?
Well, again, Laura, as I said before, overwhelmingly much of the costs of this have been in the contingency reserve up till now, and that road project is one that we're acting on because listening to the communities through the eastern suburbs of Melbourne, people say they want it. They want the difference it will make to their lives in terms of getting home from work faster, spending less time in congestion, making sure that actually they're able to move around their communities with greater efficiency, greater safety, and ultimately getting more time with their families.
When you look at the next election, or this election and the next term in government, if you win, beyond the tax cuts, what are the three main policies the government's going to follow and pursue?
Well, tax cuts, as you rightly outlined, but also continuing to pay down Labor's debt, and to do so without higher taxes, but with lower taxes. Continuing to drive jobs growth. We've outlined plans for 1.25 million additional jobs Of those 250,000 jobs targeted at young Australians, within that, 80,000 new apprenticeships that form the core of our target to make sure we grow skills in Australia. The commitments, more than $500 million worth of commitments in terms of mental health support. Mental health support targeted on youth suicide, on Indigenous suicide that the Prime Minister has been speaking so passionately about. Continuing to help people to get a start in life as well. The announcement on Sunday of the new first home buyers plan was building upon work we'd already done in terms of support for people to save for their deposit.
Is the policy cupboard, threadbare though, basically?
No, Kieran, it's not. And I think...
Well, that was an afterthought on Sunday, wasn't it?
It absolutely was not. And as I was just saying...
On the eve of the election.
It's building upon tax breaks we've given to people saving for their first home deposit, tax breaks that Bill Shorten is going to eliminate. I mean, it's not just retirees who'll pay more tax under Bill Shorten. Somebody saving to buy their first home will pay close to $400 million, Australians, in higher taxes in just trying to save to get their deposit under Bill Shorten. First home buyers, retirees, people going out to work, hard-working Australians, all of them face higher taxes under Bill Shorten. It's a strong policy contrast, but yes, we're happy to say taxes sit at the centre of it because Bill Shorten's proposing costs and taxes that Australians just can't afford.
Just finally, Simon Birmingham, how worried are you about the psychic croc, Bert, who's already picked Bill Shorten as the election winner?
I know there are crocs, there are sausage dogs, and of course there's an endless stream of polls. But what we've seen in the seat-by-seat polls, we'll see. I don't want to take on Bert personally because Bert's got bigger teeth than I've got. But I think we are looking at a very close election. All the seat-by-seat polls have shown, in some cases, the Liberal Party is in a position to win seats off of the Labor Party. Oppositions rarely win elections if they're losing seats around the country. Now, this is going to be a close one, and that's why every seat, every vote is going to matter, and people need to think long and hard about the consequences.
Simon Birmingham.
Even Bert.
Yeah, no, he's no Bindi Irwin, Simon Birmingham, but we appreciate your time. Thanks so much.
Thank you.